Shalom, I'm Rabbi Michael Panitz, and I have the honor to be speaking to you from the pulpit of Temple Israel of Norfolk, Virginia. I'll be speaking on the subject of the two sides of the matzah. Two sides of the matzah. In the majestic cycle of our religious year, we are almost at the holiday of Passover, a Jewish Thanksgiving and Independence Day all rolled into one. At the heart of the holiday observance is the Seder, essentially a gathering, an in-home gathering, for the purposes of a meal and a recitation. The meal and the recitation are related. As the classical rabbis taught almost 2,000 years ago, the recitation may be shorter or longer, depending on the abilities of the listeners gathered around the table, but it needs to include an explanation of the significance of the three central foods on the menu. The Pesach, meaning the Passover roasted lamb, the matzah, unleavened bread, and the maror, meaning bitter herbs. Those three foods were the basic menu going all the way back to Bible times. They are prescribed in the book of Exodus, chapter 12. Today we do not eat the sacrificial lamb, because we don't have any sacrifices. It's not been part of Judaism since the temple was destroyed 1,950 years ago. But we do recall that food with a shank bone on the table. The other two foods are still very much in existence. You would think that there would be no ambiguity about the symbolic meaning of the matzah, but we shortchange the possibilities of deeper understanding if we suppress the technique of the rabbis of cultivating argument for the sake of glimpsing more facets of heavenly teachings. The rabbis called this method machloket l'shem shamayim, disagreement for the sake of heaven. Our tradition is more at home in the glorious profusion of ideas about the nuances of God's Word than in the reduction of Torah to system. So it ought not to come as a surprise that our tradition has two contrasting ways of understanding the meaning of the matzah. In its narrative in Exodus, the Bible considers matzah to have been the bread of our escape for freedom. Exodus chapter 12, verse 39, quote, "They baked the dough that they had brought out of Egypt in rounds of flatbreads, for it had not leavened, since they had been driven out of Egypt and could not tarry, and provisions too they could not make for themselves." Let's unpack that. They're getting ready to leave Egypt. It's in haste. They have dough. It hasn't risen yet. They haven't eaten from that dough yet. They go out of Egypt. The sun bakes it. It becomes matzah. That is the basis of the story that we still tell and retell. Matzah is the bread of hurry, the bread of the prison break, the bread of getting out of Dodge City. Of course, the rabbis knew that verse well, but nonetheless, they explored a possibility that tended in the opposite direction. In the rabbinic Seder, we pick up the three boards or rounds of matzah and we say, Ha lachma anya di achalu av hatana bi'ar'a de Mitzrayim. This is the bread of affliction which our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. Not the moment of going free, but the years of suffering. Not the leavened bread of Shavuot, which is a holiday 50 days later, a festival originating in the free environment of the Sinai, but the unleavened bread of slavery. Not challah, the enriched dough of a people taking its ease, but the flat bread of poverty. So that's a very different interpretation of the matzah. What gave the rabbis permission to tack against the headwind of the verse in Exodus? The answer is simple: the countercurrent of another biblical verse. In its recapitulation of the covenant in the book of Deuteronomy, the matzah is described as lechem oni, quote, the bread of poverty. Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 3. 7 days you shall eat it, meaning the Passover sacrifice, with flat cakes, poverty's bread. For in haste did you go out from the land of Egypt, so that you will remember the day of your going forth from Egypt all the days of your life. Notice that the passage in Deuteronomy also recollects the haste of Egypt, but even so, it sees the matzah as the staple food of the Israelites in Egypt, not a one-time accident of hot-footing it out of Egypt with the unbaked dough still in the kneading bowl. So, we have a contradiction. Whenever we have a contradiction in the Bible, we can take one of two basic routes. We can harmonize the two passages, or we can savor the difference between them. People often want to harmonize because it is distressing for them to think about the Bible as containing self-contradiction. If God is the ultimate author, how could there be any ambiguity? But there's another way to see these verses. Pointing as they do in different directions, we can see them as members of a pair, of a complementary pair. They are the yin and yang of the larger insight that the Bible is trying to teach us. Why do we need both interpretations? What do we lose if we see the matzah only as bread of affliction? What do we lose if we see the matzah only as bread of liberation? There are Jews today who act as if matzah is only a symbol of slavery. I say this not in the narrow and specific sense, but as a broader, general point. Their Judaism is about the harsh memory of affliction. That is part of the story, of course. As the Haggadah reminds us, not only once, but in every generation, people have risen up against us to destroy us. That is sadly true, and continues to be true. Just this week, we read the news of a Capitol police officer found with the notoriously anti-Semitic pamphlet, The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, in his work area. One wonders if there are not anti-Semitic extremists in the ranks of the police charged with defending our nation's temple of democracy, who colluded with the anti-Semitic rioters on Capitol Hill on January 6th. But that cannot be the entire story of Judaism. If the meaning of Judaism is only that we must defend ourselves against bigots, then at some point we need to add, are we defending any beliefs? any sanctified pattern of living, any spirituality? Or is it just a matter of brute survival? For the Jew, if the meaning of religion is only a matter of self-defense against racists, he has evacuated the content of his faith to safeguard its container. If his Judaism be likened to a tree, he's paying attention only to the bark, protecting it from a hostile environment, and not to its inner vitality, where life courses from root to branch to twig to leaf. Nor can the polar opposite be the total story of Judaism. If we lose all sense of the specific and particular and national dimension of our identity, if we are only one of an interchangeable number of ways of teaching the Golden Rule, then what is the point of sustaining our own way? Why did we bother to revive the Hebrew language when for every Hebrew speaker there are 100 times as many Arabic speakers? If being Jewish is only about how we are part of universal philanthropy, then Judaism is a charming anachronism at best, and its demise would simply be the natural progression of history, just as there are religions that we know about but no one practices, religions of Mesopotamia, of ancient Sumer. The Bible perfectly captures the dynamic complementarity of the national and the universal. We need to love the stranger because we ourselves were strangers in Egypt. We need to love our neighbor as ourselves because of our experience. God took us out of Egypt, where we were slaves, to give us the opportunity to create a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Our own history, in all of its particularity, is indispensable. And from our own particular framework, we can best contribute to what is truly good in the multicultural excellence of the entire world. If the matzah for us is only the bread of affliction, we risk becoming spiritually shriveled. If the matzah is only the bread of liberation, we risk losing our ability to remain distinct, an integral member of the family of nations. Matzah is not a Mobius strip. There are two sides to every flatbread. Wishing you a happy and a kosher Pesach.